good evening, or good morning. Wherever this finds you, I'm glad it did. I want to talk with you tonight about something so simple that most people will hear it and nod and then go right on doing the opposite. That's the funny thing about the most important truths. They don't arrive wearing robes and carrying torches. They slip in quietly, dressed like common sense, and you think you already knew them, until the day you realize you haven't been living them at all. Here's what I want to ask you, right from the start. What did you think about today? Not what you did, not where you went or what you said. What did you think about? Because if you'll sit quietly for a moment and answer that honestly, you'll have a pretty clear picture of where your life is headed. Now, I've been talking to people for a long time, and I've noticed something. Most folks carry their worries around like a second wallet. They know exactly where they are. They reach for them first thing in the morning and pat them goodnight before they sleep. They've memorized the weight of every problem, the precise shape of every fear, and all of that thinking, all of that focused, sustained emotional attention is building something. It's building the very life they say they don't want. That's what I mean by the law of focus. And I want to tell you a story. There was a man I'll call Thomas. Not because that was his name, necessarily, but it'll do. Thomas was a farmer, not the romantic kind you read about in novels, a working farmer. Calloused hands, boots that never quite dried out, a truck with one headlight that he kept meaning to fix and never did. Thomas had a field on the east side of his property that had given him nothing but grief. Thin soil, bad drainage, grew rocks the way other fields grew corn. Every spring he'd walk out to that east field and just stand there, looking at it, shaking his head, telling anyone who'd listen what a worthless, sorry piece of ground it was. And every fall, sure enough, it was. But Thomas had another field on the west side. Black soil, good slope, held moisture just right. That field never got much of his conversation. He'd walk it quickly, make note of it, move on. He spent his mornings worrying about the east. He spent his evenings telling his wife about the east. He subscribed, you might say, to the east field. It had all of his attention. One year, a neighbor came by, older man, farmed the same county for 40 years, and he walked both fields with Thomas. When they got back to the porch, the old man just said quietly, "You know, Thomas, a field knows what you think of it." Thomas laughed. The old man didn't. "I'm not talking about the field," the old man said. "I'm talking about you. Every hour you spend looking at that east field is an hour you're not improving the west. And the west could feed your family twice over if you just give it half the thought you give the east." Thomas didn't say much, but something shifted. Not overnight. It never is. But slowly, that spring, he started walking the west field first, started planning for it, invested in it, thought about what it could become instead of cataloging what the east field wasn't. And within 3 seasons, the west field had become the finest producing ground in that county. The east field. It stayed pretty much what it was. Now, I want you to understand what actually happened there. The soil didn't change. The rain didn't change. The sun came up the same way it always did. What changed was where Thomas put his focus. And that focus determined his energy, his decisions, his time, and ultimately his harvest. Here's what I want you to understand about this. Focus is not passive. Focus is an act. Every moment of every day, you are pointing the most powerful instrument in the known universe, your mind, at something. And whatever you point it at, you are feeding. You are watering it. You are calling it toward you. The man who spends his days rehearsing his resentments will find, to his constant surprise, more things to resent. The woman who wakes each morning cataloging her anxieties will discover, reliably, that the world obliges her with more cause for worry. This isn't philosophy. It's closer to physics. What you focus on, you move toward. And what you move toward, you find. Now, I'm not suggesting that thinking pleasant thoughts will dissolve your troubles. I've met a few people who confused optimism with wishful daydreaming and they were some of the most disappointed souls I've ever encountered. No, what I'm talking about is something more precise and more demanding than that. William James, the great American psychologist, put it this way: the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. One thought over another. That's the whole game. Not the elimination of difficulty, but the direction of attention. You don't pretend the East Field doesn't exist. You just stop letting it run your life. Think about the people you know who seem to attract good things. Good work, good relationships, good fortune, not because the world is softer with them, but because they seem to walk through the world differently. They talk about what's possible. They notice what's working. When something goes wrong, they spend the minimum necessary time on the problem and the maximum possible time on the solution. They have trained their focus, whether they know it or not, and that training has shaped their lives. And then think about the ones who seem to attract exactly what they dread. Conflict finds them. Disappointment follows them room to room. Not because fate singled them out, but because their minds are tuned precisely, expertly, to the frequency of everything that could go wrong. We get what we focus on. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but with a consistency that would astonish you if you watched long enough. And now, just a moment for this message. What you hold steadily in your mind, with feeling, with repetition, with belief, you will eventually walk toward. The law of focus is not a reward for the optimistic. It is a law that operates on everyone, regardless of whether they know it is operating. And we're back. Now, I said earlier that this is simple, and it is. But simple is not the same as easy. Changing where you place your attention, genuinely changing it, not just deciding to, and then forgetting by noon, that's real work. It's the quietest kind of work. Nobody sees you doing it. There's no callus to show for it. But it is work, and it matters more than most of the things we'd call productive. Let me tell you about a young man I once knew. He was 26, working a job he didn't much care for, living in a city that felt too small, convinced that life had dealt him a short hand. Every conversation circled back to what he lacked. Every plan began with an accounting of his limitations. He was, you might say, an expert on what was wrong with his situation. Then one afternoon, almost by accident, someone asked him to describe, in detail, as though it had already happened, what his life would look like if it were going exactly right. Not what he wished for. What it would actually look like. What he'd be doing on a Tuesday morning. What he'd be working on. Where he'd eat lunch. He'd never been asked that question before, and the answer didn't come easily. He stumbled through it, but he started thinking about it. And then he couldn't stop. He'd find himself on his lunch break sketching out that picture. Not wishing, designing. Not hoping, deciding. He started reading in the direction of that picture, making small choices that pointed toward it. The job, the city, neither of those changed right away. But he changed. His focus had turned, like a ship finding its heading, and within 2 years, his life looked almost nothing like the one he'd been expertly cataloging. That's not luck. That's focus doing its work. Here's something that stops most people cold when they first truly hear it. Your life, right now, at this very moment, is a near-perfect portrait of what you have been thinking about most. Not occasionally. Not when you remembered to be careful. Most. The house you live in, the work you do, the relationships that surround you, the bank balance you either celebrate or wince at, all of it, taken together, is a kind of autobiography, not the one you'd sit down and write. The honest one. The one your thoughts have been quietly authoring, sentence by sentence, since the day you were old enough to have a dominant idea about yourself and the world. Now I know what some of you are thinking, and I want you to hold that thought right there, because it deserves a straight answer. You're thinking, that can't be right. I didn't think my way into this difficulty. I didn't sit around one Tuesday morning and choose hardship. And you're right. Nobody does. Not consciously, anyway. But here is the thing that most people overlook, and it is the thing that changes everything once you see it clearly. The mind doesn't take instructions only when you're paying attention. It works the night shift, too. It works while you're driving, and while you're washing the dishes, and while you're half listening to a conversation at the dinner table. And in all of those unguarded, ordinary, unremarkable hours, your mind is busy rehearsing whatever you give it most often. It is practicing. It is leaning. It is very slowly and very steadily walking toward whatever image you've hung on its walls. So when a man spends 5 years quietly convinced that opportunity always passes him by, not announcing that conviction, not writing it in a journal, just carrying it the way you carry a stone in your shoe, his mind has been building in that direction. Every day, whether he noticed or not. This is not a judgment. This is mechanics. And here is where I want you to take a slow breath, because what closes like a trap can also open like a door. If the life you have is the sum of what you've been holding in your mind, then the life you want is simply a matter of changing what you hold there. Not performing, not pretending, not painting a smile over genuine difficulty, but genuinely, deliberately choosing to give your sustained attention to what you intend to build, rather than to what you are afraid of losing. That's the whole principle, right there. What you hold in your mind with consistency, with that quiet, daily, almost stubborn clarity, will eventually find its way into the world around you. Not because the universe is listening with particular fondness to your wishes, but because you are. Because your attention shapes your choices, and your choices shape your days, and your days, stacked one on top of another, become your life. It's not magic. It never was. It's something far more reliable than magic. It's the way you're already built. I want you to consider something that may be a little uncomfortable to sit with. Look around at the people you know, genuinely talented people, some of them. People with good minds, willing hands, decent hearts, people who wanted more for themselves and meant it sincerely when they said so. And yet, somehow, year after year, the life they imagined stays just out of reach, just around the next corner, just after the next thing settles down. You may know someone like that. You may, if you're being honest with yourself tonight, be someone like that. And the question that doesn't get asked nearly often enough is, why? Why, when the talent is clearly there, when the desire is genuine, when the opportunity has presented itself more than once? Why does the needle not move? Now, hold on. Before you reach for the usual answers, bad luck, bad timing, the wrong connections, the wrong town, I want you to stay with that question just a moment longer, because the convenient answers are almost never the true ones. And the true answer, in this case, is one that most people will spend an entire lifetime successfully avoiding. Here it is. A man can be enormously talented and aim that talent with tremendous energy and sincerity directly at the wrong target. He can pour himself into worrying about competition instead of improving his craft. He can spend his finest hours cataloging what he doesn't have instead of developing what he does. He can be so intensely focused on why something probably won't work that he never quite finds out whether it would. And all of that effort, real effort, exhausting effort, produces nothing. Not because he wasn't trying, but because trying and aiming are two entirely different things. This is the distinction that changes lives when people finally see it clearly. Effort without direction is just motion, and the saddest waste I know of is not laziness. It's a capable person working very hard at being stuck. But here's what I want you to carry out of this with you tonight, and I want you to carry it gently, not as a verdict, but as an invitation. If the problem is not talent, then the problem is correctable. Aim is correctable. Focus is correctable. You don't have to become someone new. You don't have to wait for circumstances to rearrange themselves on your behalf. You simply have to ask, with genuine honesty, where your best attention has actually been going. And then, quietly, deliberately, starting tomorrow morning, begin pointing it somewhere worth arriving. The talent was never the question. It was always the direction. And direction, my friend, is entirely up to you. There is something working inside you right now that you did not ask for and cannot switch off. It is working while you sleep. It is working while you sit across the breakfast table, staring at nothing in particular. It is working in the silences between your words and in the long, unguarded stretches of an ordinary afternoon when you think you're not thinking about much at all. And what it is doing, quietly, persistently, without judgment or preference, is moving toward whatever image you have placed before it most often, most vividly, most emotionally. And here is the part that makes grown men go quiet when they truly hear it for the first time. It does not care whether that image is something you long for or something you dread. It makes no such distinction. It issues no verdict on the content of your attention. It simply obeys the oldest law it knows: go where the focus goes. And if the focus goes, day after day, to the thing you are most terrified of, the business failing, the marriage unraveling, the health declining, then that faithful, tireless, utterly neutral engine inside you will begin, in its quiet way, to build a road in that direction. Now, stay with me here, because this is the part that matters. I am not telling you that your worst imaginings are destiny. I am not saying that a man who worries about misfortune has signed some binding contract with it. Life is far more complicated than that, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something I wouldn't buy. What I am saying, and this is the distinction worth writing down, is that the mind operates on attention the way a greenhouse operates on light. Whatever you bring under that glass, consistently and warmly, will grow. The greenhouse does not select only the beautiful plants. It grows what you put in it. Most people have never once stopped to ask themselves what they are growing. And that question, that single, quiet, slightly inconvenient question, is where everything begins to shift. Because the moment you understand that your mind is not working against you, but simply working with whatever material you hand it, most often, something loosens. The enemy stops being some mysterious force of fate and becomes something far more manageable. It becomes a habit. And habits, unlike fate, can be changed. You don't need a new mind. You need a new subject. Give your deepest attention, not your wishful, occasional, Sunday morning attention, but your daily, returning, first thing and last thing attention to what you are building rather than what you are bracing for. Do that with consistency. Do that with patience. And that same engine that has been faithfully walking toward your shadows will turn just as faithfully toward your light. It was never the problem. It was always the solution. Waiting on your instruction. I want you to do something that most people never do. I want you to add up your day. Not your appointments, not your accomplishments, not the miles driven, or the hours logged, or the tasks crossed off a list. I mean the other thing, the invisible ledger, the one nobody sees but you. And honestly, most people never even look at it themselves. I want you to add up, as honestly as you can manage, the thoughts that move through your mind today, between the moment you opened your eyes and the moment you're hearing this. What was the dominant color of your thinking? What subject kept returning? Uninvited, the way a song gets stuck and plays whether you want it or not. Was it possibility, or was it damage control? Was it the life you're building, or the life you're afraid of losing? Was it forward, or was it the long, slow backward glance at everything that went wrong and everyone who let you down? Because here is what I need you to understand, and I need you to hear it not as a criticism, but as the most useful thing anyone has said to you in a long while. Whatever that dominant color was today, it was also the blueprint. Not the blueprint you drew at a drafting table with intention and care. The other kind. The kind that gets drawn anyway, whether you're paying attention or not. from the raw material of your recurring thoughts. And that blueprint, repeated tomorrow and the day after that, will produce a structure, a life, your life, assembled quietly, without fanfare, from nothing more and nothing less than what you thought about most. Now, before that settles into something heavy, let it settle into something else entirely. Because if a man's life is truly the sum of his dominant thoughts, then the arithmetic can be changed. Any sum can be changed. You don't change it by wishing the old numbers away. You don't change it by scolding yourself for yesterday's tally. You change it the only way any sum has ever been changed, by altering what goes into it, starting now, starting today, starting with the next thought you choose to feed. That is the quiet revolution I'm describing, not a dramatic reinvention. Not a new city or a new career or a new name. A new subject, a different dominant thought. One that points toward what you intend rather than what you regret. One that you return to, gently and deliberately, each time the mind wanders back to its old familiar territory. 30 days of that. Just 30 days. And you will look up one morning and barely recognize the view, because the man doing the looking will have already, in the most important ways, become someone new. The thoughts come first. They always did. Everything else is just the thoughts arriving in the world. Let me tell you about a thought that has quietly defeated more people than failure ever has. It arrives dressed as honesty. It speaks in a reasonable voice. It doesn't shout or threaten. It simply whispers, at the most vulnerable moments, that the kind of life you're imagining is for other people. People with better starts. People with the right last name, the right schooling, the right set of doors that happen to open at the right time. And you, through no particular fault of your own, simply weren't issued that particular passport. So the dreaming is fine as long as you're sensible about it. As long as you don't get carried away. That thought has more wreckage to its name than any storm I know of. And I want you to hold it right there, right where it lives, in that quiet, reasonable, utterly convincing corner of your mind, because I have something to say to it directly. Look carefully at the people you most admire. Not the monuments, the living people. The ones who built something real, who changed the room when they walked into it, who seemed to gather momentum while others shed it. Study them long enough, and you will find something worth noting. Most of them did not begin with advantage. Most of them began with the same ration of hours in a day, an uncertainty in their chest that everyone else receives. What separated them was not the thickness of their inheritance or the prestige of their beginnings. It was where they pointed their minds, consistently, stubbornly, through the discouragements that would have turned most people around. Focus, genuine, trained, returning to a daily focus, is not a gift distributed at birth to a fortunate few. It is a practice. And a practice, by its very definition, is available to anyone willing to practice it. You do not need permission. You do not need credentials. You do not need to wait until conditions are more favorable, because I will tell you plainly, the conditions will never announce themselves as favorable. That announcement never comes. The people who arrived did not wait for it. They simply began pointing their attention each morning at the thing worth building, and then they did it again the next morning, and the next. That is the whole secret, if you want to call it one. It is almost embarrassingly plain once you see it. Focus is a decision, made not once, in a moment of inspiration, but daily, in the ordinary moments when nobody is watching and nothing feels particularly heroic. The drifters are not less talented. They are less deliberate. And deliberateness, that quiet, unglamorous, entirely democratic act of choosing where your mind goes, is something you can begin before this day is out. Not someday. Not when things settle. Today, with the mind you already have. Now, I want to be careful here, because some people will take this idea and run it straight into a ditch. They'll hear, you attract what you focus on, and interpret it as an excuse to ignore their responsibilities, or worse, to blame themselves for every hardship that's ever come their way. That's not what I'm saying. Life brings difficulty to everyone. Good people lose people they love. Honest men face unfair circumstances. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise, and I'm not offering you some guarantee that positive thinking will shield you from the weather. What I am saying, and I believe this as firmly as I believe anything, is that within whatever circumstances life hands you, you still get to choose the direction of your attention. That choice, repeated day after day, quietly constructs the quality of your inner life and eventually reshapes your outer one as well. The farmer didn't make it rain, but he chose which field to walk first, and that made all the difference. So here's what I'd like to leave you with tonight. Just one thing, not a program, not a system. One thing, for the next 30 days, just try this. At the start of each day, before the world gets its hands on you, take 5 minutes and answer one question. Write it down if you can. The question is this: what am I moving toward today? Not what you're avoiding, not what you're worried about losing, not what you're angry about, or afraid of, or exhausted by. What are you moving toward? What is the thing worth building, worth becoming, worth working for? Give that question 5 minutes every morning and watch what happens to your day. Watch where your energy goes. Watch what you begin to notice that you were walking right past before. Ask yourself, at the end of those 30 days, whether your life feels any different, whether the West Field is getting a little more of your time. I think you'll find it does. And in the meantime, remember this, and it's worth writing down. The mind is always building something. The only question is whether you're the architect or just watching the construction. This is your friend wishing you a good evening and a West Field worth your attention. Good night.